talking about the local real estate market, one of the things that we spoke about before the break, Arnie had brought up a question about how do you write a contract offer in a competitive market where you're running into competing offers, bidding wars, and you want to write a really clean offer so you have the best chance at getting the offer, and then at the same time want to protect your buyer, your escrow situation. So, Shawn, I think you had a comment on it, and I know I do too. I think the first and foremost, you got to look at every situation uniquely. Every customer is going to be different. Their risk tolerance is going to be different. But we've certainly seen waiving financing contingency, non-refundable escrow deposits, waiving inspection periods. I think those are all things that happen, but they're risky. They're risky because you've got to understand that you might lose your escrow deposit if you don't execute. So, those are some things I've seen. Shawn?
Yeah, and we were talking about it during the break. Are you in a buyer's market, in which case maybe you want to use a contract that has no repair limits, an as-is contract, where if the buyer does their inspection and sees something they don't like, they can cancel it and move on to another house? Or are you in a seller's market, where maybe there aren't as many buyers out there, and maybe you want to have some type of repair limit? You don't want to use an as-is. And if the buyer does their inspections, finds something wrong with the house, now the seller is committed to make repairs up to a certain dollar amount or a certain percentage amount to keep that buyer on the hook. So, that's where you guys would come in to say, what market are we in this neighborhood, buyer or seller?
Yeah, and it's going to vary. I mean, there's some parts of town where you've got a super hot market where the bidding wars are rampant and the buyer has to be aggressive, or they're going to lose it, or they're competing against cash people or hedge funds. All those different scenarios. I think and in some neighborhoods you're not seeing that. And it's going to vary from price point. If you're in a market where you're looking at $1 million homes, the likelihood of you being in that bidding war type scenario is probably pretty slim. Not to say it doesn't happen, but it's not as often. But if you're buying something in a 200, 300, 400, even 500 in some parts of town, where there's not a lot of inventory and where it's competitive, that's where you're going to run into those scenarios where you might have to risk a little bit of escrow money or writing a contract that gives you less protections.
Yeah, and a lot of these contracts we're talking about are fill-in-the-blank forms, which causes their whole other separate issues. But what that means is that where the contract might default to a 15-day period of time to do inspections, if you want to be a little bit more aggressive, make it 10.
Yeah, I think
7,
you can make it, you can do a shorter inspection period, you can do a higher escrow deposit, you can waive or shorten the financing contingency, you can even waive the appraisal contingency. So for example, if you're someone, let's say you're someone who's putting down 20%, and you offer a really aggressive price, you can say, if it appraises short, I'll make up the difference in cash. Now run that by your lender. Right, Arnie? Because you got to make sure it's someone that's got enough cash in the bank for reserves and all that kind of stuff. But that's certainly a step that you can take. I think there's other things you can do. We've talked about writing a letter to the seller on the show before, where you're telling them about all the things you love about their home and why why it's right for your family. So you can find a common ground emotionally with them. I think also being quick, getting the offer in quickly, not stalling. Because if it looks like it's a good deal, it's probably going to go quickly. You may be able to get an offer in quick enough that someone else doesn't show up. If they're a smart listing agent, they probably won't let that happen because they want to make sure to let the offers.
I'll tell you what,
stall a little bit.
I'll tell you what, but I think that waiving the appraisal contingency, that one is strong. I wouldn't do it for a customer that's putting down 5% or has limited cash, but that guy's putting down 20%.
Yep.
That's a pretty good discussion to have with the buyer, because the worst case scenario is maybe you got to do it instead of an 80% loan, maybe you end up doing a 90% loan because the loan's based off the appraisal, the sales price, whichever's less. Yeah, you're going to have to pay mortgage insurance, but you know what? You're going to get your price. And
so when I bought my home, that's what I did. The home that I bought, I was up against another buyer, and interestingly enough, I waived the appraisal contingency and said, look, I'm buying it no matter what. Yeah. If I have to make up the difference in cash, I have it. So I think that if a buyer comes in and does that, especially in a market where we know that prices are rising quickly, and we know that sometimes they're rising quicker than the appraisal can show.
Right.
So that sometimes sales are falling apart because of that. Because you can write any number on the contract. In reality, it's a number that's got to pass through some checks and balances, and one of those checks and balances is the appraisal. I mean, if you pay $20,000 over market and it can't get supported by the appraisal, you're not going to end up buying that home for $20,000 over market unless you waive appraisal contingency because it won't appraise.
Right.
And
I
that's
think that's a
line.
strong message to a seller right there.
Yeah, no question.
I remember when I bought my house, we did a letter, and because I don't know if it was that old listing agent trick of, 4 other couples have been through this house today,
Sure.
you gotta put in a bid now. But we were, my wife was pregnant at the
What are you
time.
saying, that old realtors have tricks?
Hey, sorry, sorry if I pulled away the curtain.
Oh my goodness. Shawn Yesner just threw every listing agent in Tampa under the bus. Oh, you're revealing our secrets, Shawn.
My wife was pregnant. We were buying it from a family with 2 boys, and so it was that connection of, their family is getting to the point that they need to get out, and our family is getting to the point where we want in, and I think that helped with that. Despite that, whatever the listing agent was telling us that may or may not have been true, I don't know.
May or may not have been true. I like that.